Okay, welcome to the Lawyers Emotional Intelligence Book Club, session number 7 for February 15th, 2017. My name is Dave Scriven-Young, a lawyer focusing on litigation, environmental law, and construction law in Chicago, Illinois. And the purpose of this book club is to do a deep dive into books that will help us develop our emotional intelligence skills, and specifically think about how we can use these skills in our law practices. I'm here on Facebook Live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central for this discussion, and it is a discussion. Please liberally use the box below to ask questions or make comments. I certainly don't sit here as an expert at all. On the contrary, I'm learning all along with you, and I'm really interested in hearing your opinions and observations. So please help me learn from you by commenting below. As a reminder, to keep up with this book club, I encourage you to join the online discussion with our Facebook group at facebook.com/lawyerseq and on my Twitter account, twitter.com/ILEnviroLawBlog. All right, so let's move into our discussion for today, which is the Thank You Economy, chapters 9 through 13. This is the final discussion of this book, and we're all a little sad for that. At least I'm pretty sad for that. Gary Vaynerchuk is the reason why I certainly started this book club. Great motivation into how to use social media and doing things well. Certainly there's been a lot of technical tinks here and there, but I'm really excited for everyone to be here. And so let's get on with the show. Our last session with Gary Vaynerchuk. So chapters 9 through 13 of the Thank You Economy really focus in on 5 case studies. And this is essentially taking the principles that we learned in chapters 1 through 8 and showing us how different companies, different corporations, different firms can really go ahead and use those particular theories. And not a theory, it's an application from these companies. So there's 5 different companies. First is a company called Avia. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a communication systems company. Number 2 is a restaurant in Milwaukee that was called, or is called, AJ Bombers. Third is a hotel chain called Joie de Vivre Hotels. Fourth is a dentist. Her name is Irina Vaxman, DDS. And finally, a lawyer, Hank Heiming from Troutman Sanders. And we'll talk a lot about what Hank did and what he's doing today. But all of these are really interesting companies to talk about. And all of them use the Thank You Economy in different ways. Let me just give you sort of a preview of what each of them did before we move on. First, the communications systems company, Avia. This was, in the author of this book's mind, a great way of using Twitter. And what they did is they got on Twitter first before any other communications company and basically got a huge account just through Twitter. And the way they did that was responding to a question about which communication systems company that the person should use. And just so happened that the person was a huge buyer of this, and it ended up being a multi-million-dollar account. So we'll talk about that in some detail. Next is AJ Bombers, a hamburger restaurant, I believe, in Milwaukee. Great user of Foursquare, which I don't even think they really do this anymore, but Foursquare used to be that you can go on your mobile device and get not only tips about a certain restaurant, but you could check in. And a certain number of times if you checked in, if you had the most times, in fact, you would be called the mayor of that place. And so AJ Bombers really used Foursquare along with other methods of social media to build its brand and to build its business. The other thing that it did is it threw great free parties for its customers. And so that was one way that it really could build a customer base, not only through social media, but building relationships by giving free stuff out to its customers. So we'll talk about more about that as well. The third is the hotel chain, Joie de Vivre Hotels. And Joie de Vivre is an interesting, it's really an interesting concept because they really factor into, again, giving free things, but there is more giving experiences out. So, in other words, what Joie de Vivre used to do is really do some research on each of their guests that came to their hotel and figure out exactly what was going on with them. So, if it's, if they knew that, for example, one of their guests was getting married, or there was going to be a bachelorette party, something along those lines that they needed planning with, the hotel would go out of its way to help them plan things and set things up in advance for them as a great surprise. And as probably all of you know, it's really a shock and awe type situation that Gary Vaynerchuk really talks about. In that you want to show that you really care for your customers, and the way to do that is shock and awe. Really overwhelm them with value, overwhelm them with showing them how you care. So that's Joie de Vivre Hotels. And actually, I went on the website not too long ago, and actually I'm going to California for the section of litigation annual conference in San Francisco. And they really had a great website set up so you can really choose if you're a business traveler or if you're going with family. And they really tell you which hotel would be great for you. So it's really a way of personalizing what is usually a very unpersonal thing, which is booking a hotel, because typically it's something like you're just booking a hotel and it's just a room and that sort of thing. But this is a really personalized experience, and they really show the customer that they care. So the fourth is the dentist, Irina Vaxman. And what really struck me as sort of funny, and again, this book was written several years ago, is that the surprise that a dentist would actually be using social media. And what the book goes on to say is, she really, the dentist, and actually the social media coordinator was her husband, this person that really put this all together, who actually was a lawyer, surprisingly enough. But so the whole point of that was, again, making certain that she knew that her clients, her customers, patients, I guess is a better way of saying it for a dentist, really knew that the dentist cared. They would put on special movie glasses to distract their guests from the procedures that were going on, to really make them feel comfortable in that setting. And then they used things like a Groupon for a dentist, which I know is not typical, and certainly is not typical in the legal profession. But sort of what happened there is they did a Groupon, and it was so successful that they in fact had so many people call in that it really overwhelmed their front desk, and so they really had to adapt to that and really determine and really see, who was going to be who was doing a great job at the front desk and who was not, and really had to make some staff determinations based on that. So that's the dentist, and then finally the lawyer, Hank Hyming, from Troutman Sanders. He is actually, he was with a relatively good sized firm, Troutman Sanders, and is now in house. And the way that he got there is his passion in life is helping entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs who are really just starting out. And so what he had to do was do a little bit of pro bono / low bono cases that at the end of the day, those people or those companies, those small companies, turned into larger clients. And then later on, he actually ended up being in-house counsel for one of those companies. So that's sort of the layout of the 5 case studies that we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about the first concept. The first concept is what's called as showing up. Of course, that sounds very obvious, but what he says is that any network or sales expert will tell you that if you want to make the connections that will close a deal, first thing that you have to do is show up. Connections are still being made at happy hours and on the horizon breakfasts, but they're increasingly being made online too. And so this again goes to that first company, the telephone or the communication systems company, and how none of their competitors were online, but they certainly wanted to be online. So they, not online, but using social media, I should say. So what they did is they showed up on social media. And the reason why that's important is that their competitors weren't, so they really had a competitive advantage. And to continue on, he says, too many business-to-business, B2B companies are still avoiding social media because they don't believe that customers are part of the social media demographic. Over 60% of Americans use social media, and many more by the time you read this, of course. A sizable portion of those users surely make business-to-business decisions. By now, it seems pretty obvious that anyone old enough to use a computer should be considered part of the social media demographic. He goes on to say that beyond every B2B transaction, there is a C. So, and I think that's what a lot of people miss with social media. They miss that every person is really a consumer, right? But those consumers, depending on what they do for a living, might also be involved in a business-to-business transaction. And that's really the return on investment or the influence of social media. And it's that in a B2B transaction, there's always a C. There's always a consumer, usually a purchasing manager, a purchasing agent, or a buyer, who wants the same thing as any other customer making buying decisions. They want outstanding products and service, and the reassurance that someone is thinking about how to best meet the person's business needs. When deciding whether to try a new brand, purchasers usually talk to friends and colleagues that they trust. More and more of the individuals who make important business-to-business decisions, or any consumer decisions, are using social media platforms to get the advice and feedback that they need. So, here is our first question, and I know we're running a little bit. I don't know why that's weird. So our questions aren't showing up. That's kind of weird, but that's quite all right. I know what we're going to be talking about. So the question at the end of the day is, who is the business-to-business decider, and how should we get to them? How should we develop those relationships? And at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, and then let me go back to the pertinent slide. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is general counsel, right? That's sort of the obvious person in the business-to-business exchange. But at the end of the day, who else could it be? It also could be people like plant managers. It could be people that actually are maybe CFOs or CEOs of a smaller company could be making those decisions. If people don't have general counselors or in-house folks, then certainly it's going to be very difficult, or then you don't have to worry about finding a direct person. But social media is going to be very helpful to continue to reach and build relationships with those folks. So that's why it's very important for lawyers to be using social media, and that's important to show up. And that's exactly what happened with Avia, which showed up on social media, and at the end of the day, they were able to get a great account because they showed up on social media. And also, and just coming back sort of full circle to the entire emotional intelligence game, showing up is a big deal, and I think oftentimes people are really paralyzed by not being able to show up. Certainly, putting together this video cast, this live stream, a lot of people would be paralyzed of doing it for just the reasons that we're seeing during this live stream. Every possible thing could go wrong. The live stream may not work. My internet connection may be bad. My microphone may not be working. The slides may be wrong. Who knows? But everything seems to be going wrong tonight. But that's okay. We're gonna soldier on. We're gonna continue on because I think this is really important. And if I didn't show up today, I wouldn't be able to spread this message, and certainly you would never have heard about this, and would never have understood the key. In that there's always somebody who's buying. That person is likely on social media. So let's skip the question that's not there, and let's talk about the next point, which is showing up first. So why is that important to show up first? Well, again, going back to the Avia scenario, what he talks about is the companies that successfully make the move to social media ahead of their competitors not only gain in market share and earned media, they also gain in brand equity. They are recognized for their vision and innovation, for being smart and tech savvy. Such qualities can go a long way toward leading someone looking for business-to-business opportunities to believe that working with that kind of forward-thinking company is a winning proposition. So what does that mean? In fact, that means that companies can see, or the people that are running the companies or making the purchasing decisions or buying legal services, whatever you will, are looking to see what kind of companies are forward-looking. And in the mind of Gary Vaynerchuk, that thing that they're looking for, or one indication of how a company is forward-thinking, is whether they're on social media. And so the question at the end of the day is, what other qualities, in a legal context, what other qualities do folks who make the buying decisions, what do they look for to determine whether or not a company is forward-looking? I think at the end of the day, they're talking about a few things. One big one, without a doubt, is diversity. And why is that important? Well, I know that had been just reading an article the other day about how Hewlett-Packard had decided that if the firms that they were using for their legal services did not make the diversity requirements, that they were actually going to take back or not pay some of the fees. Now, I don't know if that was based on a fee arrangement that they had with their outside counsel, or if it had to do with something completely different. Who knows? But at the end of the day, obviously, diversity is extremely important. Now, I sort of hinted at what I was going to say, which was emotional intelligence is also important. And why is that? Because people who can understand that their lawyer is emotionally intelligent, they may not think of it in that context, but they will understand that their attorney cares about them, whether it's through gifts, whether it's through great customer service, whether it's through using their emotions wisely and using their emotions to gain an advantage, whether it's not being overwhelmed by a bully attorney on the other side, or whether it's through just taking great care of the client. That's another great way that companies can see that a firm, or that an attorney specifically, is forward-looking and really wants to work with them. So here's another point, another interesting point, which is what is the effect of giving away free stuff? Shock and awe. So again, what I was telling you is that this AJ Bombers was this restaurant, and they threw these really great parties for their folks, or for their customers, I should say. And so what he says here is the way AJ Bombers does business, who gets their money. So really, he's talking about the dichotomy between doing traditional advertising, or through giving money away to their customer in terms of free things. So he says the customer who takes a chance on them gets the money, and that's a textbook move in the thank you economy. When AJ Bombers throws a party and hands out free burgers and beer, they're spending the money on their guests that would have otherwise forked over to traditional ad platforms. You have the choice to spend $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 on a week-long ad campaign that may or may not register with their audience, or to spend the money on an event, one that combines the two goals of interacting with your customers and showing them a good time, or a campaign that not only brings a lot of joy to people, but whose effects spill over as people talk and share and post pictures. When put in those terms, which sounds like the riskier investment? So that's a really great point, and a really great thing to think about in a legal context. Of course, my question isn't there, but you can already guess what it is. And it's going to be, how does that ever going to apply to attorneys? What kind of free stuff are you going to be giving away to clients? And I always think that legal advertising is kind of tricky, especially in a traditional context. So recently I've been, not recently, I've been an NPR listener for quite some time. And, you always hear that the newscast or whatever, they sometimes have commercials. Public radio usually doesn't have a lot of commercials, but they will sell you, the broadcast is brought to you by X firm. And they'll say it's a global firm that does everything under the sun, and they give a website address. I frankly have no idea what that does for anybody. Since I'm a lawyer, I know who they are. But I cannot believe that whatever they're spending, whatever advertising dollars they're spending on that, is getting them anything. Now, perhaps you can say, well, it gets them a little name recognition, that sort of thing. Okay, that's cool. But at the end of the day, what does that do for their clients? I don't think it really does anything. What does it do for potential clients? Really anything. A firm that has a type of money to do a radio ad on NPR or other things certainly can show, I think, better shock and awe or give free things to their clients. So let's just take a step back for a minute. Let's talk about the very big client, or the very big firms, international law firms, and what do they do? And I worked at a few, or two, I should say, and I think the question is, what do the clients get or not get by or through their connection with the firm? So they're being charged a very high hourly rate to do work. Typically, they're being charged for every single little cost under the sun, which is usually maybe a paralegal's fee, sometimes even, and I'm not sure if it's like this anymore, but when I started, they actually had a code for, they actually billed, I think they billed, for long, I can't even think of what it is, not local calls, but long distance calls. You actually dialed in a code, which would have been the client code, and then you dialed the number. They also billed for things like copying. So before you even were able to make a copy, they put in a client code. Again, I have no idea what actually got billed to clients. I'm not even saying that it's wrong to do that. They can charge whatever they want, and if the client wants to pay it, that's fine, that's cool. I totally get that. But the question at the end of the day is, what is the client getting for all of that money that they're paying out? They're getting great representation, right? They're getting comfort that if you give this firm the this litigation, that they're going to be covered. That they can go to the clients, and if they're a general counsel who hires a big firm, they can go and say, look, I hired X, Y, and Z, the best in the nation law firm, and we lost, but there's nothing else that I could have done. And so what could they do with that, however much it costs to buy an NPR ad? They certainly could have thrown a great party for their client. They really could have brought in, they could have sponsored some, local entrepreneurs club or something like that, throwing them a great party. And we'll get to sort of what the attorney in the case study has done or is doing. And so I guess at the end of the day, what I'm saying is you really can do a lot of things to show your clients that you care. And instead, maybe, of spending the money on traditional ad campaigns. I think the point is really well taken. I think it's something that clients would really appreciate if firms did more of that. Instead of, they're wondering, well, how do we bring in business? Well, let's go and let's do these ads. I don't think I think you could do the ad, maybe, but focus on bringing people into the fold, throwing a great party, could really go a long way. So let's talk about the attorney that was the subject of, I think, the last chapter of the book. And he says that, and I sort of already described it to you, so I won't do it again, but what he says is that Haming, who's the attorney, has created and spread his own culture as well. So his passion is guiding and advising startups from conception to money-making maturity. When he moved to Virginia from Southern California, he was frustrated by how small and diffuse the entrepreneurial community was. So obviously, Southern California is, really known for entrepreneurs. And then he moves to Virginia, which was a smaller community. At first, he complained about it. Then he decided it was up to him to nurture a solid network of local entrepreneurs and venture capitalists that would help him foster a thriving client base. So, during his free time, he started offering pro bono or sharply discounted advice to startups. Haming insists that it does not take a lot of time to offer fledgling startups the services. An investment is quickly paid off once the companies get financing, and he can start charging them like regular clients. So I know, a lot of people watching this are probably aghast that something like this could possibly occur. Aghast that anyone would offer pro bono or low bono assistance to companies. But again, we have to think about what's occurring in this new economy. What we have here is, especially if you think of the technology startups, you have no idea. When I say you, I really mean me at this point. I really don't know. Most people don't know. You look at a company who's just starting out, what's going to happen in their future. So take Facebook, for example. Take Google or Twitter. So everyone right now is trying to make their own, social media platform or great tech app, that sort of thing. And as Gary Vaynerchuk, I think, often says in his videos, there are a lot of, there are only a few Facebooks, and Instagrams, but there's a lot of Instacraps. So in other words, people who try to make these tech companies, and they want to make this, world-changing app, and so they try to do that, and oftentimes it fails because it just doesn't gain traction for whatever reason. What's important, I think, to remember is that, or to think about, is that you really don't know what companies are going to succeed and what what companies are going to fail. And so at the end of the day, how do you determine which ones to advise? And I think what we have to remember, coming back to our Thank You Economy principles, is that good intent is always the start. And so what is really the good intent? The good intent is to think about who needs your help and how you're going to provide that help, right? We're going to be thinking about who really needs your legal assistance. It's really any small company. And now there's a way to sort of, I think, divvy out which ones you can really think about providing this pro bono or low bono rates to. And certainly, in Chicago, I know there were several entrepreneur conglomerates that sort of house such many small entrepreneur shops. And so perhaps you can go through a service like that. But I think there's a lot of ways to think about doing it. And just remember, at the end of the day, start with good intent, because that's really what's going to bring it all back. If you start with the fact that you have someone who needs help, want to care about that person, you certainly are going to go ahead and help them, regardless of whether you think it's going to pay off one day. If it's only a very small time investment, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's something that I'm certainly going to think about and start doing in my own community, and I really encourage all of you to get involved in that as well. And certainly, if it's not, and again, I think what's important to remember is when it comes to emotional intelligence, we have to remember what we're talking about. We're talking about knowing who we are as people and what our interests in. So this guy's passion was guiding small startups. That was his thing. And so he tapped into and really helped grow entrepreneurs in his area. Now, for you, it might be something completely different. You might be, small farmers, something like that. For me, it might be, theme parks or sports or something like that, but wherever it is, that's where you want to get involved. And what he said is you want to get involved in your own community and where your passions lie. If you're starting with good intent, it may really just work out for you very well, because you're not expecting, look, I'm sure that he had a lot of startups that he advised that he spent some time on and completely failed, because that's what happens. But it didn't matter to him. Well, I shouldn't say that. It mattered to him because he was probably very sad to see that the company failed. But it probably didn't matter a whole lot to him whether or not all of the companies turned out to be, wonderful, thriving businesses. But some of them will. So it's sort of a side benefit. You're going to be getting a great, providing a great service and getting some results in return when those small clients turn into really big clients, and they are your clients for life because you help them out in their time of need. So that's really starting with good intent, and that's really the basis for the Thank You Economy. Okay, I think I've rambled enough on for today. I know we're having a lot of trouble with the Facebook live stream, so I really apologize for that. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on and try to do better for next week. But we're going to just continue motoring on, and I really want all of you, if you watch this, at a later date, I really hope that you send me some comments, either on the Facebook page, facebook.com/LawyersEQ. You can hit me up on basically any social media, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I'm at IL Enviro Law Blog. So please go there, and I'd love to hear from you. Either if you can comment on any of the questions that we talked about today, any of the subjects we talked about today. If you want to ask me questions about emotional intelligence generally, you want to talk about the thank you economy, I'd be more than willing to spend time and talk with you online. But I'm really excited because our next book, as I have tried to say before, is the Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And why did I pick this book? Well, I was really trying to figure out what to do for our next book that would really tap into and really delve into emotional intelligence. Because I think by now all of you get the game, what we're going at, why emotional intelligence is important, and why it's especially specifically important for lawyers. Because the whole world has changed with technology, everything else. The clients have changed, tech has changed, our legal practices have changed, and we need to figure out how to be resilient. Emotional intelligence will help us to make those adaptations. So the one thing that I had always been thinking about, and again, Gary Vaynerchuk is really an evangelist for this, is figuring out what you're good at and what you're not good at. And his thesis is this: figure out what your strengths are and double, maybe triple down on your strengths. Don't worry about your weaknesses at all. And which makes sense at some point. And I the StrengthsFinders book, the StrengthsFinders company, I think sort of helps with that as well. Figure out what you're strong about and then move forward with that. I don't really think that most people are 100% emotionally intelligent. And I think each of us can work on those skills. The reason is really simple, is that no one really teaches them. At least they didn't when I was a kid. Now, I don't know if there are schools nowadays. I don't think in my son's schools that they do this. But certainly they don't really teach emotional intelligence as well as they could. And that's why I'm learning, along with all of you, during this book club. So what this Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is going to do for us is going to give us a test, a study, if you will, so you can answer questions, and it will give you a score for each of the areas of emotional intelligence. And so I think that's really important to figure out, to give us sort of a baseline. And so those baselines would be things for self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. And so I'm going to take the test. I recommend that everyone takes the test, and I would love to hear. I don't want to hear your scores or anything like that. I just wanted to know from y'all what maybe your lowest score was. And I'm really interested in sort of compiling that data, and that'll help me to figure out where to go from there. Because this book not only gives us the questionnaire to tell us where we're low in emotional intelligence, but it also gives us very specific strategies on how to become more self-aware, how to have better relationships, and how to manage relationships better. And so we're not only going to go through each of those strategies, which I think will be really interesting, but also then that's going to help us kick off into other books. So, for example, for self-awareness, perhaps we'll be talking about the StrengthsFinders book, or things like for self or for relationship management, things like empathy would be very important. So we can read a book about empathy. And so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be starting off with Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I know I've always said Wednesday night is going to be the night, and it will be. Next week I'm going to be on trial. I have a breach of contract 2-day trial that's scheduled Wednesday and Thursday of next week. So unfortunately, I cannot do the book club next week. But this is going to be a great opportunity not only to figure out and buy the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book, but also to take the test, and perhaps give me some time to work out some of the kinks and the technical side of things. here at the home front. But anyway, I want to thank all of you for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure. I've been learning a ton, and I hope you have been too. So for now, so long, and we're going to be talking about the foreword of the book in Chapter 1 on March 1st at 7 p.m. Central, facebook.com/lawyersEQ. So I'm going to sign off, everybody. I hope everyone has a great night and a great 2 weeks. I'll see you on March 1st. Take care.
that was